Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Outlander is a time travel fantasy historical show set in 18th century Scotland, where Jamie and Claire Fraser are trying to ensure that Bonnie Prince Charlie manages to win the 1745 Jacobite Rebellion. Episode 9, Suis, Prest, marks a change in tone for Outlander, something hinted at by the title card shot of a 20th century half-track. Now, having secured Lord Lovett's troops last week, things haven't gone all rosy for Team Fraser, as a lot of the men have deserted, and the ones that remain are pretty untrained and an undisciplined lot. So, arriving at the rally point where Murtaugh and Fergus are waiting with the Fraser men, Jamie finds that his other uncle, Dougal, has arrived, along with Series 1 regulars Rupert and Angus. There's a wee bit of tension as Dougal's there unofficially because Colum and the Clan Mackenzie soldiers aren't getting involved, as we found out last week, and Big Dougal is keen to press on with the meat to the rest of Prince's army, but Jamie wants to wait and train his men. And it turns out that Jamie's right, as the men are kind of rubbish, and as he says himself, they're not really soldiers, and a modern trained practice army is going to wipe them out really easily. Of course, none of this training is helped by the frequent interruptions from Dougal, and at one point he even comes screaming down at the troops, taps off and all muddy and trying to be old-fashioned fighting, and just to prove how green these recruits are because they all run away. Then Dougal manages to press gang a whole bunch of men and bring them into the camp without the sentry stopping them, and this means Jamie has to punish the sentries by having them belted, and then puts Dougal in charge of sentries and camp defence, which ticks him off a wee bit, but still, it manages to put Dougal in his place. Meanwhile, Claire's having a bit of a strange time of it, after she gets pestered by Dougal and gets really cross, so cross she literally tells him to fuck off. Then she tries to give Angus advice against Trenchfoot, and then starts having a flashback to a similar time where she gave those advice to some GIs during World War II. And then she gets really cross with him. See, she's clearly having some kind of trauma, and she keeps seeing these two GIs wandering about the place in flashbacks. And it all boils to a head after the beatings of the sentries, and the sound of gunfire sets off some deep-rooted PTSD, and she starts having a full-on flashback of the time when her and a couple of GI pals were driving in a jeep, and they got shot off the road by the Germans, and then one of the men got shot, and the other one got trapped on the other side injured, leaving her alone and terrified listening to his screams until she was found the next morning, clearly traumatised. Finally she breaks down and tells Jamie all of this, and that helps clear the air a little bit. But just as things seem to be getting sorted out, Jamie gets attacked while he's having a wee by a wee strip of an English laddie who doesn't want to talk, so Jim's all about to torture him Rambo style when Claire comes past in a moment of inspiration, pretends that she's some kind of captive Englishwoman and that Jamie's going to make like he's going to ravish her, and Claire plays it up all breathless and swoony. Anyway, the daft wee boy falls for it and he spills the beans about the English army camp and their strength and how many soldiers there are, and so Jamie orders him to be taken away near there and killed if he's lying, but tied to a nearby tree and left alive if it's true. So just before the boy goes, turns out his name's William Gray, and he swears a life debt to Jamie and says that after it's repaid, he's going to kill him. But I'm sure that won't be important later in the show, or in another series of books by the same author. Of course, there's a wee issue of the fact that an assassin came into the camp, and Jamie decides that instead of whipping Dougal, he ends up blaming himself and takes the beating, showing off his back, and then afterwards leads the men to the English camp to steal their cannon wheels and burn them, rendering the cannons useless. After that, it's time to pack up and leave before the English arrive, but now the far better trained troops jaunt off to meet Bonnie Prince Charlie's army at Crieff. So what did I think? Well, this episode was a genuine departure from the normal show in an awful lot of ways. I mean, from the 1940s stuff, which was kind of surprising, because we haven't really seen any proper war stuff in the show before, and the flashbacks with the tall bloke off where do we go from here, that was all quite strange and interesting. It shows that Claire's actually seen far more of the war than she lets on about. I mean, it wasn't all just like surgery and drinking champagne on VE Day. And it was also good to see that she actually suffers a little as well about things, and that Jamie can actually be there to help shoulder her burdens for a change, which is kind of a reversal to what's happened over much of the season up until now. But the real standout this week for me was Jamie. I mean, we've always been told that Jamie's great and that he's this kingly leader of men, but in practice, it's not been shown all that much in the show. I mean, sure, he led a few wee sorties in season 1, but it's always been like an underling to Dougal or Colum, or he's never actually been in a proper position of power. I mean, even when he was in France, he was doing the whole, oh, let's be gentrified and everything, and it was all kind of subversive and trickery. But now he's actually just home, in his own country, leading men, and he's actually getting to do the commander bit and bring in his knowledge and his learning that he's had over many years. And it's really interesting to see the relationship between him and Dougal. I mean, it was just brilliant, and huge props to Graham McTavish as well for so subtly playing like the brimming anger and the conflict inside Dougal as he's forced to serve his nephew, and the brimming reactions underneath about how he feels, considering that he's no longer in charge, and that he's desperate to actually make a name for himself and free Scotland at the same time. Another great scene was the one when Jamie pretended to be going to ravish Claire. I mean, that was fantastic, the whole way it was done, just mainly because of the actors playing off each other beautifully, and just the tiny little looks between them. I mean, that was just a brilliant scene, wonderfully observed. And I'm quite surprised that I've seen some people online complaining that they thought it was actually quite terrifying to look at and scary, and it was all a bit rapey and nasty. I actually thought it was played for comedy and done quite well, and I thought in this instance that kind of worked, because you knew it was just a setup and it was all kind of a bit silly, and knew that everyone in the room except for the English boy understood it. But anyway, this is Grumpy Opinions. And I've not actually got a whole lot of grumps this week, because kind of if you think about it, not an awful lot happened this week. I mean, that's kind of one of my complaints. I mean, apart from the introduction of Lord John, yes, I know that William Grey is Lord John, the guy from the other book. Not a lot of important stuff that happened this week. I mean, there was character moments, yeah, but most of it was montages and hanging about and guys standing in fields, hitting things with swords and shooting guns. I mean, the other issue that kind of bugged me this week was that a lot of the little plot threads never felt that they actually got resolved by the end, and that kind of made the episode feel strangely vapid in a lot of ways. Clearly, I mean, the episode was supposed to be about Jamie being a good commander and a leader of men and telling you that he's getting his forces together and that he can actually lead people. He's not just, this hunky Captain Nice Guy sort of person. He's actually a trained leader and a warrior and somebody who would be really good in charge of things. And it does that well enough, but at the expense of feeling a little bit repetitive. And the same kind of goes with the scenes with Dougal. I mean, we see Graham McTavish and Sam Heughan vying for power and the dynamic and how that shifted. And I really enjoyed that. But I didn't feel like there was a satisfactory conclusion to that. Not even for the episode. I mean, presumably it's going to go on further episodes with a continuing relationship that will grow. But I felt like that could have been a bit more to actually do something with it, to bring it together. I mean, I didn't really feel like the tiny little bit at the end when he kind of turns around and goes, "Oh, it's okay. There you go, you can ride off there and say hi to the Bonnie Prince." And then Dougal's all smiling like he's a petulant child that's been given a lolly because he didn't misbehave on a car journey. But even the whipping scene, I mean, when you think that Jim's going to order Dougal to get the slap and instead he takes the lashes himself, I mean, it was clever, but it wasn't closure. The other thing that I thought was a bit odd was Claire's PTSD. I mean, that kind of came out of nowhere, and it meant that for a lot of the episode, she just wasn't in it, and it felt like it was giving her something to do to a little extent. But it was interesting, and I thought the actual flashbacks, they were interesting as well, but I felt they could have been done more. They were so bitty, and it felt like the whole bit where she introduces herself with the two characters over breakfast. It was a scene that didn't really need to be there. It didn't need to happen. All you need to know was that at some point she was in a van or a jeep with a couple of soldiers, and they died, and it was a shame, and she was kind of traumatized by it all. It really just didn't feel like you needed to know who these characters were to the kind of depth that the episode gave it. And even then, just to simply have them turn up, here's these two characters, boom, they're both dead. It seemed like a little bit pointless. But otherwise, I actually quite liked this episode. As I said, I didn't have that much to grumble about. So until next week, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.